handling busy prospects is one of, if not the biggest challenge when it comes to deploying AI voice agents in real life. And if you have worked with an outbound AI voice agent before, then you have probably encountered responses like, "Oh, I'm at work right now. Can you call me back in the afternoon?" Or "I'm driving. Can you call me back in 30 minutes?" Or sometimes the prospect just doesn't pick up at all, right? This scenario is not ideal, but it happens in real life all the time, right? And it's not easy for AI to handle this scenario. Usually, the go-to way to handle this is to send a follow-up text message or email to the prospect, but then this often get ignored, not seen by the prospect at all. So, what would be a better way to handle this? Well, the way that a human would be to ask the prospect for a better time to call them and then call them back at that time, right? So how can we achieve the same outcome with an AI? How do we make the AI ask the prospect for a better time to call them back and then schedule that callback at the specific time that the prospect asked for? Well, today I will show you exactly how to do that. But first, let's look at a demo of how it works. Alright, so I'm getting a call from the AI now. Hello?
Hi, is this Nathan?
Yeah, who's this?
Hi, Nathan. I'm May, a digital assistant from Nomatica. I saw you sent your details in and are interested in one of our trips. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think I clicked on one of the ads.
Awesome. I'm just giving you a call to see if you're still interested in joining one of our trips this year. Is now a good time to chat?
No, I'm actually driving right now. Can you call me back in like 30 seconds?
I'll call you back in about 30 seconds. I'll call you back shortly, Nathan. Stay safe while driving.
Bye. Alright, so that should trigger the callback in about 30 seconds. And as we can see here, there's a callback being scheduled in a few seconds, and I will share more detail about how this works exactly. But now we are just waiting to see if a callback will actually happen. And there we go. Hello?
Hi, is this Nathan?
Yeah, still me, still Nathan.
Hi, Nathan. I'm May, a digital assistant from Nomatica.
The callback was successfully triggered at the exact time that I told the AI to call me back. So it works. So as you can see in that example, me as a prospect, I talked to the AI. I told the AI that now is not a good time to talk and to call me back at a later time. In this case, I use 30 seconds because it's a live demo, so I don't want to have to wait for too long to see the callback result. So I only specified a really short window of time. In reality, it would more likely be a longer period. The prospect might say, "Oh, call me back in 30 minutes since I'm driving, since I'm busy right now," or "Call me back in the afternoon," or "Call me back tomorrow morning." Right? So the system will be smart enough to handle all those cases, and I will show you exactly how in this video. So, what is the benefit for having a system like this in place? Well, according to reports, on average, 20 to 30% of sales calls are not picked up the first time by a prospect. And even if they do pick up, the 80% of them who pick up, a lot of them might not be available to speak at that time right away. And so, if we talk about what are the ways to really increase the conversion rate of sales calls like this? Implementing an effective callback measure like what I'm showing you now is probably one of the best thing that you can do to increase the conversion rate of an AI voice system that are making outbound calls to prospects. Because think about it, right? No matter how good your script is or how natural, how intuitive, how smart your AI voice agents are, if the prospects are not able to speak to it, if they are busy, right? If you cannot find the right time to engage with them, then all of those things are for nothing, right? Before we dive deeper into the detail of how the system is set up, let's first take a look at the high level of how it works in principle, right? So first of all, we start by making an outbound call with the user information via the API. In this case, I'm using retail, but the same principle applies to other platforms as well, right? So we will make the outbound call, injecting the user information into the call, right? So in this case, we have their name, their email, and their phone number, right? And so if the call goes through to them, meaning that they do pick up, which is the ideal case scenario, right? Then instead of diving right into the conversation, we are going to instruct the AI to ask the user if now is a good time for them to talk. So if they can talk, right, then the AI will go ahead and have a conversation with them based on the script that we define, which is again the best case scenario. But in the cases where they are busy, they cannot talk right now, then we will offer to schedule a callback. If they agree to that, then we are going to ask for their location first to decide which time zone they're in. So this is assuming the case where the business might be making calls to prospects that are in different time zones. If they are all in the same time zone, so for example, if your business knows for sure that you are only calling the people in the same time zone as yourself, then you can ignore this step. But here I'm assuming that the prospects might be in the different time zone from the business. And so if that is the case, then we are going to ask them for their location to determine the time zone. And then we are going to ask them for a preferred time to for the voice agent to call them back, right? And keep in mind this step is very important because as we will see when we look at the detail prompt, there are many different ways that the prospect can express the time that they want to be called back. So they can say something more specific like, can you call me back, okay, tomorrow at 9 a.m. Or they can also say something, they can also express the time in a more relative way, like, can you call me back in 30 minutes, right? So our system needs to be smart enough to handle all those cases. It needs to be smart enough to handle all the different ways that the prospect can say the time, basically. And then once we have the time zone information and the time that the prospect would like to be called back, then we are going to schedule the callback with the user information, with the same user information that we used to trigger the outbound call, in this case their name, their phone number, and their email. And we are going to use a tool called Cronhooks for that. So what this tool basically allows us to do is that it allows us to schedule the same API call that we used initially to make the outbound call to user. I will talk more about this tool in detail later. And so once we make this, once we schedule this callback, the user will receive the call at the exact time that they specified, whether if they specified a specific time, date and time, or if they specified a relative time, right? Now, if we go back to the flow earlier, that is in the case where the call does go through, right? What if the call doesn't go through? Well, in that case, again, we are going to still use the same technique of scheduling a callback via Cronhooks in order to trigger a callback to the same user using their information. Now, the only difference is that since we didn't get to talk to the prospect, we cannot get the time, the ideal time that they would like us to call them back. So we might need to set a predetermined period here, like maybe 24 hours after or 6 hours after, something like that, right? Which is not as ideal, but it's still better than not calling the lead back at all in the case that they did not pick up. So on a high level, this is how the system would work. So in order for us to schedule the callback with the user information at a specific time in a specific time zone, we are going to use a little tool called Cronhooks, which is what I'm showing you on the screen here. Cronhooks basically allows us to trigger a webhook at a specific given time in a specific time zone with a specified payload via an API. Right, so in this case, the webhook we want to trigger will be the API call to make the outbound phone call in Retail AI. One thing to keep in mind is that this is actually a paid tool, but it only costs $5 a month for 100 scheduled webhooks, which for most cases, from my experience, should be enough. So it's not really that much in terms of extra investment, but what you get back is a very reliable and robust way to schedule a callback in a specific time in the future. Alright, so now that we have looked at the high level approach and also the tools that we are going to use, let's take a look at the detail of how the setup works. First, starting with the prompt, right? So here, in terms of context, I have an AI voice agent that works for basically a travel agency, and its job is to make calls to prospects who have interacted with the business before, specifically interacting with their social ads, and then fill out a form providing their information such as their name, their email, and their phone number, so that the business can engage with them to help them explore travel packages, basically tours packages. The job of the AI voice agent in this case is to call the prospect, answer any questions that they might have, ask them a few questions, and then book an appointment with a salesperson later, right? So it's quite a typical sales script, but what I want you to focus on is specifically the part in which we will handle the callback. Pay attention to step 2 right here. All right, so after introducing yourself, after the AI introducing themselves as a digital assistant and confirming the user's interest, instead of jumping right into the questions, we are going to ask them if now is a good time to talk first, right? And if they say yes, then yeah, continue with the conversation, continue with the script. However, if they say no, then we are going to follow these steps. So first, we are going to ask them when would be an ideal time for them to call back, right? Now, remember in the earlier part of the video where I said that this system should be smart enough to handle different ways that the prospect might express the callback time. So again, they can say something more specific like tonight at 9 p.m. or they might say something more relative like in 1 hour, right? So we need to be able to handle all that, right? So here we have the specific instructions to handle those cases. So if they provide a specific time period, like 10 a.m. tomorrow or after 5 p.m. today, then we ask for their current location to figure out their time zone. Then we are going to call the schedule callback function with the provided time as well as time zone. So we need the time zone in the case when they share a specific time like this, because if they only say today at 5 p.m. without asking for the time zone, we would have no idea what exact moment 5 a.m. today would be in their time, because I'm based in Vietnam right now. 5 p.m. today, my time, would be different than 5 p.m. today for someone in New York, United States, for example, right? So if they provide a specific time, then we would need to ask for the specific time zone, and we do that by asking for their location, where they are located right now. On the other hand, if they provide a relative time period, so for example in 5 minutes, then what we want to do is actually we don't need the user's time zone anymore. Why? Because the AI actually knows what time it is at the moment, and it knows that using this current time dynamic variable that retail provides to us by default. We don't need to do anything else. We don't need to inject anything else. We simply need to inject this dynamic variable using curly braces like this. The AI already knows what time it is currently, and so because of that, if the prospect asks for a relative time period after the current time, then we can simply instruct the AI to calculate the exact time to call back by adding the given duration to the current time, right? So for example, if right now is 11 a.m. current time, right? 11 a.m. and the user said that, oh, can you call me back in 30 minutes? Then the AI will know to add 30 minutes to 11 a.m., which is 11:30 a.m., and then it would schedule that callback. And one important thing to keep in mind here as well is that the current time by default given to us by retail is in the Los Angeles time zone, right? So when we call the schedule callback function with the time and the time zone, right, we are calling it with the time being, the exact time that the AI calculate by adding the given duration to the current time, and then the time zone being America, Los Angeles, right? And again, we don't need to mention the time zone with the user because they are asking for a relative time to call back. And then finally, when the scheduling is done, end the call, right? And wait for the callback. So this prompt setup should allow us to handle different ways that the prospect can express the time that they would like to be called back, whether it's exact or if it's relative. The next thing we want to look at is the function, right? So in the prompt, we mentioned a schedule callback function here, and that is the function we are going to use to schedule the callback. So looking at the function description, the function definition here, we can see the name, the description of the function, the webhook URL, which points to a make.com scenario that I will show you guys later. In terms of the inputs that this function expects, right? So let's talk about the one that we already talked about, which is the callback time, right? So this is the time to call the user back in a provided time zone in ISO 8601 format, right? And no time zone value needed. And this is due to the way that the Cronhooks API works, is that in order to figure out the specific time to schedule the callback, it's going to use the time value, and then it's going to also use the time zone value. So that's why in the time value, we don't need to specify the time zone, right? And that is also why we have a separate time zone value here. Besides the time and the time zone, we are also going to pass in all of the user's information that we would need to personalize the conversation with them, right? And these are the same values that we are passing in when we trigger the outbound call initially via the API. So we have the name, we have the phone number, and we have the email. So yeah, this is the function that we will use to trigger the callback from retail. And then what will happen is that when this function gets called, the AI is going to extract this information from the conversation so far with the user, and then is going to send all those information to our make.com scenario, which I will show you guys later. Next, let's talk about the automations that we would need to build in order to make the system work. For this system, we are going to need 3 automations, 3 scenarios, and I will include the templates for these scenarios as well as the prompt in the video description in case you guys want to build a similar system yourself. So first, we have the scenario to trigger the retail outbound call, right? And for simplicity here, I'm only going to trigger the outbound call using a simple Google Sheet. So basically here, if there is a new row comes into the Google Sheets, then we are going to trigger the outbound call, and we are going to have these sheets having, the name, the email, the phone number of the user, right? So that we can use in the next step, which is to make the outbound call, to trigger the outbound call using the retail API. And the setup is pretty simple. We need to specify the URL to make the phone call. It's a post request, right? And we also need to input our API key for retail here, right? So the API key would go after bearer. And then in the request content, we are going to specify how the outbound call should be made, right? So we specify the from number, and this is the number defined in retail. So in retail, we can see that we have a phone number set up, and it is being assigned to this agent. And this is the same number that we are going to specify in the API call here, right? So this is the number that we want to make the call from, right? And specifying this number also means specifying which agent we are going to use to make the outbound call. And next we are going to specify the to number, which is the phone number of the prospect, and we get that from the Google Sheets. So in this case, you can see the results from the Google Sheets here, this new row being added with my name, my email, and my phone number, right? So retail is going to use this phone number. We are going to specify that phone number for retail to know which number to make the call to. And then in the dynamic variables, we are also inserting the name of the prospect, the email address of the prospect, as well as the phone number. If you remember in the diagram, we talked about two cases, right? One case where the call goes through and one case where the call doesn't go through, right? So in this scenario, how do we define that, right? So basically, I have a sleep module here, which basically delay the execution of the subsequent steps. So after the call is triggered, after the outbound call is triggered, right? When this runs, the user will receive a call immediately. But what we will do is that we are going to delay this scenario by 5 minutes. So it will wait for 5 minutes for the potential call to finish, right? And once it's finished, we are going to make a request to get the call information. So get the information of the call that just happened. And here I'm using the get call API from retail, and I'm passing in the call ID of the call that happens in this previous step 2. And what this will do is that it's going to give us the information about the call that already happened, right? So when this call gets triggered, there are two scenarios, right? Either they pick up or they don't. And in order to figure out if a call gets picked up or not, we are going to look at the call status. In this case, the status of the call is ended, which means that it was picked up and it ended. So we are not going to trigger any callback here because the user did pick up, right? But in the case where the call status is error, which means that something went wrong, that the user didn't pick up, or the agent just could not connect to the user, right? So in the case where the call status is error, which I do have a condition here to check for that, then we are going to set a callback time 24 hours from the current time, right? So basically this means we are calling the user back in 24 hours, right? And obviously this time window can be set according to your preference. For example, like I'm setting it as 24 hours, right? So we set the callback time to 24 hours, and then we are going to trigger the Cronhooks API to schedule that callback. So if we look at this module here, we can see that we are no longer calling the retail API anymore, but we're actually using the Cronhooks API, specifically the schedule endpoint. And what this allows us to do is that it allows us to schedule a webhook to be triggered at a specific time, right? So if we scroll down, and by the way, the API key that should be inputted here should be the Cronhooks API key, not the retail API key, right? So the right API key should be inputted based on whichever API you are calling. So if we scroll down to the request content, right, we will be able to see how Cronhooks work, right? So basically we specify a webhook URL, which in this case, this is a different automation that I will show you next, right? But this automation will make the outbound call. Basically what we are telling Cronhooks to do is to trigger this webhook with the following information here, right? So at the time that we specify, in the time zone that we specify, send this following information to this URL. So let me repeat that one more time, right? Here we are passing in the time that we want to trigger the callback, which in this case is 24 hours after the first call failed. And then we are setting the time zone in this case to my current time zone. And we are also specifying the payload of all of the dynamic variables that we want to insert in the call. And so what we are instructing Cronhooks to do is to send a webhook with the following data to this address at this specific time based on this time zone. So now let's look at this specific webhook. Let's look at this specific URL, where it comes from and what it does, because we are just telling Cronhooks to send the information to this URL, right? But we would need to look at what happens in this scenario. So to do that, we are going to jump to this automation, right? So this automation is what will make the callback, and the URL that you are seeing here is the same as the URL that we specify for Cronhooks, right? So basically, again, Cronhooks send the following information, the following user's information, right, to this URL at this specific time, right? And then once this scenario receives that information, so in this case you can see that it receives my name, my email, and my phone number here, then it's going to make the API call to retail to again trigger the outbound call. And this is exactly the same API call and payload to the request that we sent initially to trigger the initial outbound call, right? Remember this step? It's the exact same API and the exact same payload, right? And the exact same values as well. The only thing different is the condition and the time that this API is getting triggered, right? So instead of being triggered from a new row from Google Sheets, this API call to make the outbound call in retail is triggered by Cronhooks based on a specific time and specific time zone that we specified, right? But the action that it does is the same, making the outbound call from this number to this number, injecting the following dynamic variables. And so if we look back at the diagram, we just covered the case where the call doesn't go through and we schedule a callback using Cronhooks, right? What about when the call does go through but the user doesn't want to talk right away and they want to schedule a specific time for a callback, right? The scenario that we saw in the prompt earlier, right? How does that get handled? So if you remember in retail, we have set up this function called schedule callback, right? That gets triggered when the user said that they want the AI to call back at a different time, right? And we passed in the time zone, and the information, right? And we pass it on to this URL, this webhook URL, right? So this webhook URL points to our final automation that we would need in this case, which is this one, schedule callback, right? So the URL should be the same here. And basically, this scenario will receive the following information from Retail AI, right? Of the user's information, the time that the callback should happen, and the time zone that the callback should happen in, right? And what it does next is that it's going to call the Cronhooks API, the exact same API endpoint schedules that you saw earlier in the other automation, right? And again, it passed in this information, right? So basically, we are instructing Cronhooks to send the following information to this URL in a webhook at this specific time based on this specific time zone. And where does this URL point to? It points to the earlier automation that we had, that we covered, which is to make the outbound callback. So when the user in the call specify that they want the callback to happen at a specific time, we basically call Cronhooks to schedule a webhook API call with that information. So I know that this part might be a little bit confusing, and if you do feel confused, then I would suggest that you look back at this diagram to understand what's going on, right? So there are two scenarios that we want to trigger a callback, right? When the code doesn't go through, right? This case, and when the user does pick up or does not want to talk, right? So in both cases, we are using Cronhooks to schedule a callback, right? So we are calling the same Cronhook API in both cases. We just call it in slightly different scenarios. So in both cases, we are calling the Cronhooks API to schedule the webhook, and Cronhooks in turn will call the make.com scenario to make the outbound call based on the user's information. And as usual, I will leave the link to the diagram, the prompt, as well as the automations, the make scenarios that you guys can see here in the video description. And that is how to make an AI voice agent call back prospects when they are busy and cannot pick up the phone or cannot speak. While it is not the most easy setup to build, from my personal experience, I find it to be the most effective way, the more superior way to handle cases like this. Instead of sending text message or email, which might not be seen by the prospects, now we can call them back proactively and still engage with them, which definitely helps with conversion rates. If you would like to implement a similar system like you have just seen, feel free to reach out to me. And if you find the video useful, feel free to give it a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. And I will see you guys in the next one. Stay curious. Bye.